are beginning a new series called Walls, which I will explain in just a little bit. Last Saturday, not yesterday, but the previous week, I think most of you know, we had the Youth Jam beach trip, where we went to Lido Beach in Entebbe. We took one coaster, and we also took my car. My car was full of people, and everything was going fine on the way there. By the way, it was a great trip. The guys, our team that planned it, did a phenomenal job, did an excellent job. But on the way there, everything was fine. We got through Kampala, but then getting through Kampala onto Entebbe Road, we hit a massive jam. And I don't know, this seems to be, every time I go to Entebbe on Saturdays, there always seems to be a jam on Entebbe Road recently. Well, this was terrible. We're on somewhere like on Entebbe Road, Queensway, when we hit the jam, and it went on forever. And we're sitting there, not moving. We're watching the minutes tick away, and every minute that ticks away is 1 minute less that we get to enjoy the beach. And so eventually I told Kenneth was driving, and I was just sitting in the passenger seat, and I told him, I said, there's a road I know which goes around. It will go around this jam. But getting there from here, I don't know if there's a way through. And I said, but let me check Google Maps, and we'll see if we can find a way. Now, I don't know if you know anything about using Google Maps in or around Kampala, but it can get you in huge trouble. Huge trouble. And so I have used it many times. About 50% of the time it works. But we were sitting in the jam, and so Kenneth is driving and I'm navigating, and I said, okay, according to Google Maps, there's on your left ahead somewhere about 500 meters. We can branch off, and it should connect us to the road, which I know after some few turns. And so Ken said, okay, let's try it. So we got ahead after, it took us like 10, 15 minutes to move that 500 meters. We were moving so slowly. We get to the turn, and it's on the left, and Ken almost goes beyond it because he looked at this small car road, and he said, are you sure? Are you very sure? I said, yeah, it should be fine. Let's at least try it. So we took the road, and it got smaller and smaller, and with every turn, we branched on our right, we branched on our left. With every turn, it got smaller and smaller and smaller. And Kenneth said, are you sure? I said, well, I'm not sure, but let's at least keep going and let's see. We're almost there, and I'm watching on the map, right on my phone. I'm watching, and we're almost to the road, which I know. We're almost there. And so I said, just keep going. We're almost there. We're about to reach. And finally, we made this left turn, and we went down the turn, and we reached, and there was no way through. Literally, there was a wall on every side. We had just driven into some people's homes, and there were walls on every side, and we stopped. Now, here was the most frustrating thing. From where we were, I could see the road that we were supposed to be on. I could see it, but there was no way to reach it. Bodabodas could pass through a small ditch area, but cars, there's no way. There's no way through. And it was so frustrating. We're almost there. We're about to reach, and I could see the road. But there was no way through because there was walls on every side. Now, the worst part of the story is we had to turn around and we had to go back. You know, these days, I don't know if you have driven recently or ridden along Ginger Road and Entebbe Road. There are traffic police everywhere these days. And so the worst part of the story is we turned around. Coming back, Kenneth had to drive in the shoulder to get back into traffic. And we got stopped by traffic police, and we escaped one traffic police. He stopped us. He allowed us to go. We tried to explain to him we're leaving this road, which he thought was a lie because he knows that road goes nowhere. But he finally believed us, and we again had to get back into traffic, leaving that traffic police behind. There was still, again, no way, nobody's letting us into the jam. And so again, he asked to rush ahead on the shoulder driving, and just ahead, another traffic police called us. And the traffic police behind called him, and he said, there's no way, you don't let that guy pass. They tried to impound the car, and anyway, we had to pay the fine, but at least they didn't take the car. We reached Entebbe. Now, I'm telling you this story because as I was preparing for this series this week, I began thinking about that story and about how when we got down that road, I could see where we were supposed to be, but there was this wall blocking the way. I could see it. I could see where I was supposed to be, but I couldn't reach there because there was some wall. Now, in this series, we're talking about following Jesus. Specifically, though, which, by the way, is mostly what pretty much every message I ever preach is about following Jesus. So, this series is about following Jesus, but specifically, we're talking about obstacles, walls that get in our way when we are trying to follow Jesus, or maybe you're just thinking about following Jesus. You're trying to figure out what that looks like, and there's different walls, different obstacles that get in our way. And maybe your experience of following Jesus is like our beach trip. Everything was going along fine for a while. You've been saved, you've been following Jesus for a while, and then you ran up against a wall, and you couldn't figure out how to get from where you are to where you're supposed to be. And the truth is, you know where you're supposed to be. You can see it. You know where God has called you to go. You know what He has called you to do. You know what He has called you to be like, and yet you can't quite get there. There's some obstacle, some wall that stands between you and where you're supposed to be. Maybe for you, the walls were there before you ever started following Jesus. Maybe you're not even really a follower of Jesus yet. Somebody invited you to come to church, and you've come and you're thinking about this whole Jesus thing. And we have quite a few people that come to church here that are not really quite sure they really want to follow Jesus, but they're interested. They come and they want to check things out. And maybe that's you. You're interested in following Jesus. Maybe a friend invited you, and someone's been witnessing to you, but there are so many obstacles between where you stand and Jesus. Maybe it's friends. Maybe it's family or your reputation. Maybe it's preconceived ideas about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Maybe it's lifestyle. I don't know. Whatever it is, but there's some wall that stands between you and following Jesus. And for some of us in here, maybe most of us, you've been following Jesus for a long time. But now He's been calling you to a deeper level, right? A move, a shift, a change, something new, a step of faith. But something's holding you back. You've hit a wall and you're not moving forward. Well, in this series, we're going to look at different walls, different things, different obstacles that come between us and Jesus. And we're also going to look at what we can maybe do about it. Now, in this series, I've tried to group these obstacles together in categories. I've tried to. So that, otherwise, if I didn't, honestly, the series could go on forever and ever and ever. As it stands right now, we're looking at about 5 weeks, maybe 6 weeks, unless I can figure out how to condense some stuff together. But right now, we're looking at about maybe 5 weeks as I try to put everything into certain categories. And this morning, what I want to talk about is fear. Fear is a wall that will come between you and Jesus. Now, fear is a very broad category, right? It can be fear of the unknown, fear of what your friends will say, what your family will do, fear of your reputation, fear of what people might say, what people might do, fear of trust. So many of us have trust issues, right? Fear of trusting God, fear of having faith. And maybe that's you. Maybe you were following Jesus and He called you to a deeper level and He called you to make a move to do something, and fear is what held you back. Being afraid of what the future looked like. Being afraid of what God was calling you to do. Maybe you've never started following Jesus. Once again, maybe that's you. And you want to, and you can. You're here, and you can feel like the Holy Spirit. You don't even know what it is, but it's the Holy Spirit, like tugging on your heart, moving in your heart, and you can feel that. But something is holding you back, and maybe that thing is fear. How will my life change? What will my friends say? What does this mean for my family? Well, if that's you this morning, and it's fear that's holding you back, there's this wall in front of you and Jesus, and it's fear. If that's you, you're in good company this morning, because, as we're going to see, Jesus' disciples found themselves in the same situation. And we're going to be reading this morning in John chapter 20. And so if you have your Bibles, you can go ahead and begin turning to John chapter 20. If you don't have your Bibles, it's fine. As always, the words will be on screen as well, and you can follow along there. And we're going to begin in verse 19. But before we begin reading, let me give you a bit of context. This story that we're going to read takes place after Jesus' death, His burial, and His resurrection. So just earlier in this chapter, earlier in chapter 20, which we're not going to read, what happens is the women go to Jesus' tomb, right? They're going to anoint the body. They didn't get a chance, as we talked about some weeks back. They didn't get a chance to anoint his body and to put the spices and everything else. And so they're going to do that thing. But when they reach there, according to John's account, they reach there and they find the tomb empty. Finding the tomb empty, they go back and they tell the disciples, hey, we just went to the tomb where Jesus is supposed to be buried, and he's not there. So telling the disciples, what happens is that Peter and John go running to the tomb to try to figure out what is happening, what is going on. They reach there, Peter and John reach there, and Peter goes in and he sees that Jesus is not there. The linens that he was wrapped in are there. The one that was covering his face, it says it's neatly folded in place, but Jesus is not there. And then we don't know, what we do know from John's account is that John believed. It says John believed. In other words, he's seeing the scene and he believes in his heart Jesus has raised from the dead. It doesn't tell us what Peter thought or what Peter believed, but we know that John believed that Jesus had risen from the dead. They leave, and apparently Mary, maybe some of the other women come back, and as they come back, that's when they meet Jesus for the first time, the risen Lord, the risen Jesus. They meet him physically. Having met him physically, the women again go back to the disciples, and they tell the disciples, we have just seen Jesus. Jesus is alive. Now, this is all what has happened prior to where we're going to read. Now, knowing that context, what you would expect is that the disciples would be out telling everyone the good news. Jesus is alive. That's what we would expect to see. We're reading this for the first time, without any background knowledge. That's what you would expect. Jesus is alive. The women have testified to it. They would be out telling people the good news. Or, at the very least, let's assume not everyone believed, okay? We know John believed. Maybe some of the other disciples believed. Maybe they didn't. So let's assume John believed, some of the other disciples did not. Let's assume that. If that's the case, then at the very least, what we would expect to find is that the disciples are out trying to find out, to uncover the truth about what has happened. These women are saying Jesus is alive. They saw him. John believes it. I'm not sure if I believe it, but I want to go to the tomb. I want to see what's happening. I want to talk to the guards. I want to talk to some witnesses and see if we can figure out if Jesus really is alive. But that's not what we find here. That's not what happens. Look what happens. Let's begin reading in verse 19. John chapter 20, verses 19, and we're going to read through verse 21. On the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked, the disciples were where the disciples were for fear of the Jews. So they're behind locked doors. They've locked the doors. They're hiding. And Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Jesus is showing them that he's real, that he's physically alive. He's not some spirit. He's showing them that he's really there. Showing them his hands and his side. Then the disciples were glad when they saw the Lord. And Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you." And then he said, "As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you." They should have been out telling everyone the good news, or again, at least finding out the truth. But instead, we find them locked inside of a house because of fear. The disciples here, they have both literal walls and metaphorical walls. I mean, they are literally locked inside of a house with walls on all sides because they're afraid to move forward. They should either be out telling the good news or finding out the truth if they didn't believe it, but they're afraid to even leave the house. They're behind literal walls, locked inside, and they're also hiding behind walls of fear. Doors locked, afraid to go out and do what they should be doing. But notice this. I love the image of this. Jesus walks right through their walls. In some way, we don't know how it works, in some miraculous way, Jesus' glorified body after the resurrection, he's literally able to just pass through walls. I mean, it just says that he appeared in their midst. Jesus walked right through their walls. And this is what Jesus does. This is what he does. Whatever your obstacle is. And you can see where you want to be, right? You can see where God has called you, what God is calling you to do. But there's this wall in your way that you can't seem to penetrate. And for you, maybe it's fear. And we're going to talk about other walls in the coming weeks. But whatever it is, you feel like you can't penetrate that wall. You can't go around, can't get over that wall. And yet Jesus can. And so many times what happens is Jesus just walks right through your walls. And he walked right through their walls, and now he's going to deal with their fear. And he has to. Jesus has to deal with their fear. He knows what's going on. They're hiding. They're hiding. They're afraid. They're hiding. They've locked themselves in, and now he has to go in and deal with their fear, because their fear has paralyzed them. They're stuck. They're trapped by fear. Now, we've talked about this many times before in many other series, and I'm going to say it again in this message, and it's simply this: fear will keep you from following Jesus. It seems so simple, and it is so simple, and it feels like I shouldn't have to say that over and over again, but fear will keep you from following. It will keep you from following. You see, fear is deceitful. It's so deceitful, fear. And by the way, this applies to physical things as well as spiritual things. But obviously, I'm talking about primarily spiritual things this morning. Fear is so deceitful because it doesn't feel like you're actively saying no to Jesus, right? It doesn't feel like you're being disobedient, that you're actively saying no. It feels like I'm just stuck. I'm just stuck. It doesn't feel like disobedience. But notice what Jesus said. Can I go back? Notice what Jesus said in verse 21. The last thing that he says. As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you. He's saying you have got to get out from behind these walls. I have sent you out. I am sending you out. And you're stuck here, hiding in fear behind these walls. And yet I am trying to send you out. He's saying you have got to move out beyond these walls. Obedience to Jesus requires that you move beyond them. And this is why fear can be so deceitful. Because we don't feel like we're being disobedient. When we're afraid to move forward, we don't feel like we're being disobedient. We just feel like maybe we're stuck. Maybe we feel like we're being wise. Well, I've got a family to protect, and my finances, and my health, and I've got all of these circumstances. And maybe fear actually deceives you into thinking that you're actually being wise. When in reality, when obedience requires us to move beyond our walls, then giving in to fear is disobedience. It is. Now, remember, the other problem with fear that we've talked about many other times, several other times at least, is that fear doesn't go away on its own, right? I mean, most of the time we tend to think that if I wait it out, if I just wait, I'll work up enough courage, the fear will pass, and it doesn't really work that way. Again, we've talked about this before, but fear typically doesn't go away on its own through waiting. Usually if you wait, the fear just increases. The longer you wait, the more that fear builds up inside. Again, in almost any area of life. And so the longer you wait, the more that fear builds up. It typically doesn't go away on its own. It usually just gets worse. But maybe this is what the disciples were doing. Maybe this is why they had locked themselves in their room, in that house. They're waiting. Maybe they were waiting to have enough courage. They're waiting for the courage to work up inside. Or maybe they were waiting for things to be more secure. For things to be a little bit safer. Right now, we're very unpopular. Right now, it's not a good idea to go out. If we just wait a little while longer, and things will cool down, and tempers will cool, and this will all blow over, and things will be a little bit more secure, a little bit safer, and then we can go out. Because that's what we think in life. That's what you and I think most of the time when we're afraid. That the answer to fear is courage. If I could just have enough courage, if I could work up enough boldness, or we think it's safety, right? Well, I would do this thing that I know God was calling me to do if I could be 100% certain that He was going to provide for my needs and I was going to have enough money and I would have these luxuries or whatever. We want security, we want safety, and we feel like those things, either courage and boldness or safety and security, are the answers to fear. And some of us are waiting. God's called you to do something and you know what it is. And you're waiting and you're praying, God, give me boldness, give me courage, give me boldness to do what you've called me to do. And you're continuing to be disobedient because you're waiting on that boldness to happen. Now listen, praying for boldness isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, that can be, praying for boldness, praying for courage can be a good thing. But a lot of times it can be just an excuse for you to continue hiding behind your wall of fear, being disobedient. For some of us, we're waiting for things to be safer, to be more secure. If I could have security, if you could guarantee me that I'll have all that I need, Jesus, I'll follow you into this situation. The problem is that neither of these things are the answer to fear. Most of us are raised to at least believe that courage and boldness are the answer to fear, but the reality is they aren't. Courage, boldness, safety, security are not the things that are going to settle our fear. When Jesus walked through their walls, He dealt directly with their fear. And what did He say? He said, peace be with you. Jesus promises peace in the face of fear. You see, in fear enslaves you, but peace releases you. That's the truth. Fear enslaves you, but peace releases you. Now here's why. Let me explain why. Fear, and you know this. You know that all of us have examples in our own life where this has happened. Fear is paralyzing. Fear can be totally and absolutely paralyzing. The more fearful you are, the more paralyzed you become. Just recently, with some friends of ours, we were in Kampala. My wife and I spent the weekend in Kampala just trying to have, it was our anniversary, and so we were having it was also her birthday recently, and so we were kind of having this birthday / anniversary celebration where we spent the weekend in Kampala, and we decided to act like kids and go to Wonder World, just for the water slides. Wonder World actually has some pretty awesome water slides if you've never been there. And it's funny because one of the friends that we were with, when I was like, hey, I got an idea, let's go to Wonder World, let's go ride these water slides. She said, well, is it safe? And I said, well, safe, I don't know. I don't know if it's safe, but it's fun. It's definitely fun. And it's I think it's fairly safe. So we decided to go. We went, and we were literally on like our second slide. I mean, we had not been going very often. And there was this metal plate on the ground. By the way, you're like, God, I don't know. It's high. It's very, very high. And I mean, it's for sure taller than this guest house. I mean, they're quite tall. And my wife, she's on the top level. For me, I had already gone down. But she sees this metal plate on the floor, and the edges were quite sharp. And of course, you're barefooted. And she said, wow, this is dangerous. Someone's going to cut themselves. And she reaches down to pick up the plate. And when she did, what she didn't know is that plate was covering a weakness. That metal plate was covering a weakness in the floorboards. And when she picked up that plate, the boards fell, and she fell straight through the hole, almost plummeting to her death. She fell, and she fell onto her elbows right at the chest level. A friend of ours who was there, one of the friends who was with us, he saw her and immediately he saw her and grabbed her and pulled her up and quite literally saved her life. She would have died for sure. There's no way she would have survived that fall. Saved her life. Now, I was at the bottom, down at the bottom, and I hear the noise and I see these boards fall, and I have no idea what happened, but I kind of look up and I see our other friend. She's on her hands and knees and she's peeking through the floor, and there's this look of horror on her face. And in that moment, I panicked. And I knew what had happened, but I didn't want to admit it in myself. All of these things happen in just a matter of seconds. But I know my wife's obsessive compulsive tendencies, and I knew that because I had also seen the plate, and I just left it there. But all of this in just a matter of seconds went through my head, and I knew what had happened. My wife had seen the plate. My wife had moved the plate, and the plate must have been guarding some weakness in the floor, and it's probably my wife who went through there. Now, I couldn't see whether she had fallen through or not. All I could see was my friend's face peering through the hole with this look of horror on her face. And for a split second, I thought, I have lost my wife. And I wanted to run up the stairs, but instead I stood there completely frozen for about 15 or 20 seconds, literally unable to move. Why? Because fear is paralyzing. It's paralyzing. I finally snapped out of it. I ran up there and found my wife, and she's a little beaten up, and everybody's shaking, and everybody's worried, but she was alive and quite fine, other than a few scrapes and bruises. But fear is paralyzing. And it will keep you from pursuing God's call on your life. It's enslaving. It's paralyzing. It's enslaving. It will keep you locked up behind your walls, waiting for the courage, waiting for boldness, waiting for safety, for security, and it's not going to work. Now, here's what peace does. So fear is paralyzing. Peace doesn't remove the fear. It's important that you understand that. Because a lot of times we use this word peace as an excuse, don't we? In Christianese language, we like to say, well, I was going to do this, but I just didn't have a peace about it. Right? And what you mean is, I prayed for God to give me a peace, and the fear didn't go away. And so I don't have a peace about it. Fear doesn't make the peace go away. Here's what it does. Peace releases you from the paralyzing effect of fear. Okay? It releases you from the paralyzing effect of fear. Fear doesn't go away. Not always. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it goes away. The more you do something, the fear begins to go away, right? Sometimes it doesn't go away. But peace doesn't make the fear go away. Peace releases you from the paralyzing effect of fear. It releases you. Fear enslaves you, but peace releases you. It releases you to do what God's called you to do. It releases you to take that step of faith. It releases you to follow Jesus. It releases you to do what you know God has called you to do. In John chapter 14, a few chapters before what we just read, Jesus has just finished explaining to his disciples some pretty terrifying things if you're a disciple of Jesus. He has told them that one of the 12, one of his closest friends, is going to betray him. And the result of that betrayal is that he's going to be crucified and that he's going to be killed. And he reveals in that same chapter that Peter is going to deny him 3 times. And then he tells them, after all of this, the next thing that he tells them is, and I'm going to go away, right? I mean, if you're a follower of Jesus, all of this is pretty terrifying. One of us is going to betray you, and you're going to be crucified, and Peter's going to deny you, and you're going to leave us? This is terrifying. We've been following you for 3 years. So you can imagine the disciples were concerned, they were worried, they were upset, they were afraid. And look how Jesus addresses their fear in John chapter 14, 27, the same way he does in John chapter 20. John chapter 14 and verse 27. Peace I leave with you, and my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. You see, Jesus will give you peace in the face of your fear. The fear won't necessarily go away. It might. But that's not what Jesus promises. What he promises is to give you peace in the face of your fear, in the midst of your fear. So the question is this morning, what are you afraid of? What fear is holding you back from following Jesus? From pursuing his call on your life, to do what he has led you to do? Look, the fear is probably not going to go away. Probably isn't. Maybe eventually, maybe months, weeks, years down the road, maybe it will. Maybe it won't. Things will never be perfectly secure. But God can, and he will. He promises to give you peace in the face of your fear. And that peace will release you from the paralyzing effect of fear. Let's pray together.